About Reading and Studying Billy's Publications, by Atlant Bieri after an interview with Billy.
A correct study is a gigantic explosion, which no longer ends. It spreads out further endlessly, exactly like the universe.
Billy, 10th of January, 2004. Revision by FLAU and Mariann Uehlinger. 12th of September, 2020.
At a school or university, studying means the successful assimilation of information content into one's consciousness. One reads large amounts of text, tries to remember as much as possible, replicates a substantial part of it at the exam and afterwards forgets most of it again. If one compares the pile of school material covered with the pile of material recalled in one's memory, one will find that the former exceeds the latter many times over. Unfortunately, learning at school is like leafing through a large encyclopaedia. Thousands of pages come and go, and in the end, one has not made much further progress with one's own education than a boat that rocks up and down on the waves of the sea, but is not being impelled forward. However, books are by no means valueless. The knowledge of terrestrial culture lies dormant in them. However, educational institutions and the media de-educate society and turn books into another short-lived experience of an unconsciously lived life. It is this strained, bad interaction that stands between the student and a deeper understanding of Billy's writings. Studying requires reading. Reading is an extensive term. It does not necessarily depend on written language. An entomologist studies the behavior of butterflies without ever catching sight of a letter. In the shape, color and movement of the butterfly he or she reads its behavior. Reading does not only mean to decipher words, rather more generally to interpret the world by means of basic signs, shape, color, speed, etc., and to translate them into ideas. The reading of a text is therefore a silent communication of ideas captured on paper. For example, tree is an idea, but the sequence of the letters T, R, E, E, itself has nothing to do with a plant. They are freely invented signs, which are placed one after the other in a freely invented sequence. The idea tree, which results from the sequence of characters, is linked to an object in reality, namely an elongated, multi-branched structure covered with leaves. This definition is of course not absolute. For someone else, the idea tree is the thing in the living room that went up in flames last Christmas. Often a person combines several concepts with one and the same idea, but the concepts are always different for different persons. Written communication is the exchange of ideas through written language. Since one single idea can have an endless number of meanings and is interpreted differently by each person, everything requires a successful and clear communication from both the sender and the receiver, as well as carefulness and conscientiousness. The multitude of possible interpretations is an inexhaustible source of misunderstandings. Unfortunately, as a rule, the necessary carefulness in order to be able to persist in using the language is not innate to the reader. On the one hand, language is an instrument for imparting knowledge. On the other hand, it is a disposable product that is trampled underfoot, fuel for the human desire for entertainment and diversion. Every day the media produce vast amounts of text in order to satisfy the reader's thirst for information. News texts have a short lifespan. They can already be history a few seconds after the first contact with the reader. Many do not even see the light of day because the reader is not interested in them. The media are like a salad buffet. One can take whatever meets one's taste and one also does not have to skimp on the greasiest and unhealthiest dressing. Language is not only the ladder to enlightenment, but also an orgy of pleasure in the murky pool of foolishness. Reading is not only a science, but also numbing intoxication in which the meaning of words is meaningless. Precisely because language consists of ambiguous ideas, the conscious misleading use of words is a common means used by media professionals in order to obfuscate the meaning of a statement. Readers are thereby actively involved in the burial of a deeper understanding of the content of the text. To comprehend the sense of a word completely is not a leisure activity. Understanding is a science that demands work from the lazy, pleasure-oriented readers, but for them, what words say is less important than the immediate feelings they call forth. Every day they pour oil on the fire of their own emotions with words such as virus, love affair, environmental catastrophe or fundamentalism. Readers are used to wolfing down texts and regurgitating them again undigested in the next second in order to convey them to others. Information flows in an endless turbulent stream that blocks the view to the basis of wisdom. For the reader, unclear impressions remain, which quickly fade away and are finally overlaid by other unclear impressions until these too fade away. These are bad prerequisites for the esteeming and understanding of Billy's works. In order to be able to grasp Billy's texts even only on the surface, the reader must once again accept reading as a scientific activity. In a first step, one must muster the modesty to accept one's own mother tongue as a foreign language. What does deference mean and where does the word sanctimoniousness come from? Knowing exactly what the words mean in one's own language is the first duty for the readers of Billy's texts. There is no shame in always having a good dictionary within easy reach. Whoever works with dictionaries will ascertain that a word often has several meanings and that these themselves require a more precise explanation and definition. Working with a dictionary awakens the consciousness for the multitude of ideas that are behind a term. The dictionary is a plow with which one breaks open the firmly stomped ground of one's own understanding of language in order to bring to light ideas, parallels, metaphors and comparisons. Here is an example. According to the dictionary, the word death means the end of life. N means limit. Limit means a region with borders. Border means edge. Edge means surface. Surface means the outer view of a body. Body means life. Suddenly, the word death is no longer a negatively burdened term, rather a placeholder for a whole universe of ideas that have as much to do with becoming as with passing. If one now examines every word in a sentence in this form, then the content of the sentence is no longer just a superficial impression. Rather it becomes a matrix of consciously made interpretations. In this matrix there is no more right or wrong, true or false. There are only possibilities left, and they all need to be explored. Belief in words is thus excluded from the outset, and with it the danger that Billy's texts degenerate into religious doctrines. Memorization is not the answer to real study. Submitting oneself to the words is not the answer to a real understanding of the text. Every word is a universe and every sentence consists of a multitude of universes. Whoever treats the language in this form is on the best way to successful study. The next task the student has, is to transfer the language, the word, the proposition into the fine fluidal sphere of the human existence, into the realm of the consciousness. This is the internalization of the text and its exploration beyond the material world of ideas. Terms of the language are also consciousness states and thus also belong to the fine fluidal world, which is detached from words and paper. So far, the student has separated the seed from its husk. He or she has looked at it from all sides and tried to understand its surface. Now the seed must be placed in fertile soil so that it can germinate, so that the germ can grow and the explosion can take its course. However, the earth may be sand, and where there is bone-dry desert instead of moist humus, no herb grows, and certainly not the fragile plant of wisdom. Therefore the student must go into himself, herself and break up the dried soil again and then water the desert inside her inner nature. Whoever wants to have a plant requires a seed and good soil. Whoever wants to attain wisdom requires an input and the willingness to absorb the input. This willingness is not implicit. The student has to work for it himself, herself. The inner nature of the human being is the soil, the world is the seed. There is a border between the I and the other, and it is the student's culmination point to make this border disappear. Wisdom is written in every blade of grass, in every cloud and in every breath of wind. However, it bounces off the one who has not prepared the ground in her inner self. It bounces off the one who drops the seed on desert soil. In the world of diversions, concentration is the magic word in order to water the inner desert, not to be distracted by the multitude of impressions in the material world, but rather to listen with all attentiveness to the sound of the individual impressions, to absorb the sound waves in oneself and to find spiritually perceive the resonance swinging waves in one's inner self, so that one eventually becomes sound wave, breath of wind and cloud oneself. Right learning is meditation. The pure information of a text remains outside of the human being, remains outside of her behavior and being, if it is not built into one's own being human. But this integration requires silence of the thoughts and reclusion from the material world. Integration requires time for pondering and reflection. It is therefore worth more in one's life to have thought and meditated on only one of Billy's sentences than to have read everything of Billy's and not to have thought about anything and not to have meditated. Studying does not mean collecting knowledge in a can and henceforth carrying that can around with oneself. Rather, studying means becoming. Studying is not a process of storing the inanimate word as an inanimate fact in the brain. Studying means that one heads towards a certain state, that one becomes the virtue oneself, even the essence of a statement. The fallow field in oneself and the seed that falls from the outside onto this field fuse together and become a growing plant. The growing wisdom in the inner self of the human being. This is the explosion that Billy talks about. It is a study that takes place inside the human being, not on paper, not in books, not in the memory, not in the remembrance, rather beyond the material impressions. Such study is a never-ending development, a never-ending stream of growth and of becoming. One can only fathom the essence of a statement through a detached insight in the here and now. One cannot force insight. Once the grain lies in the damp earth, then all that is needed is the sun, the light, the silent observation that lets the seed shoot up into the sky, and no matter how much a hand moves, it cannot accelerate this silent process of growth. In the plant, in the inner nature alone, one finds truth. It is this inner study which, as the result, meets the promises of the books and words. In the inner nature of the human being all possibilities, all delusions of the brain and all matrices fall together to one single inner truth, to one single clarity, to one single growing plant. This is the kind of study that the reader of Billy's writings shall strive for.